In 1821, United States President James Monroe enjoyed widespread popularity. Indeed, one contemporary journalist branded the years of his administration the era of good feeling. In the aftermath of the War of 1812, it reflected a sense of national purpose and unity. The period witnessed the Federalist Party fade from the political landscape, terminating the partisan wrangles between it and Thomas Jefferson's Democratic Republicans. Yet the third president would have found it difficult to recognize the coalition he had initiated. In the face of hard truths, party regulars had adopted many Hamiltonian doctrines, so much so that old Federalists were now comfortable in what had been, but was no longer, an opposition party. By seeking domestic unity and, he hoped, eliminating factions, President Monroe endeavored to build a national consensus. And from 1817 to 1824, he largely succeeded. Citizens were even able to assess the calamitous War of 1812 through a veil of self-congratulation. A fellow would have had to have been utterly optimistic or wholly delusional to claim an American victory. Truthfully, the exhausted belligerents had judged that the struggle was not worth the candle, cut their losses, and declared a status quo ante bellum. Still, Americans preferred to accentuate Andrew Jackson's final triumph at New Orleans and disregard the shameful surrender of Detroit, the trouncing at Bladensburg, and the incineration of their national capital. They dubbed the conflict the Second War of Independence, and it had yielded some positive results. In the Old Northwest, it shattered the power of hostile tribes and evicted British fur traders from American soil. Of more psychological and symbolic import, Yankee Doodle had stood up to John Bull, and by God, never again would Whitehall's Ponzi aristocrats undertake to browbeat the sons of Washington and the soldiers of Jackson. The year before, Americans demonstrated that they were willing and able to cooperate for the common good, preserving the balance of power between slave and free states. Congressmen enacted the Missouri Compromise, which admitted Missouri as a slave state and Maine as a free state. The statute regulated slavery in the Western Territories by excluding the South's peculiar institution in the former Louisiana Territory north of the parallel 3630, except within the boundaries of the proposed state of Missouri. For a time, Americans hailed the 1820 agreement as an essential conciliation, almost equaling the Constitution in its substance. Ultimately, the edict could not avert the slide toward civil war. Nonetheless, many historians assert that it postponed hostilities by decades. Notwithstanding the general mood of contentment, not all Americans harbored good feelings. The Panic of 1819 damaged them all, but had utterly devastated poor folk living on the frontier. The United States' first peacetime financial crisis, it brought about a general collapse of the national economy that persisted through 1821. Many destitute citizens prayed for a way and a place to begin anew. A willowy, curly-headed Missouri college boy was about to answer their prayers. Circumstances were different in Mexico. Selfless heroism and shameful opportunism, a yearning for the old order and a thirst for autonomy, splendor and squalor, all were evident in that afflicted country. conflict and contention had left the people craving stability and a national identity. In 1821, following more than a decade of bloody conflict, Mexicans finally secured their independence from Spain. They had paid a high toll for their victory. During their battle for freedom, they had sacrificed 1/10 of their total population. The two countries differed most in their political traditions. The British colonies in North America had developed representative foundations to a far greater degree than Spain's American colonies. Norte Americanos had benefited from a lengthy period of salutary neglect, during which their institutions had evolved gradually. By 1776, they were experienced in the ways of representative government. Conversely, Mexicans inherited one of Europe's most obdurate monarchical traditions. After fighting so long and so hard to gain their independence, they found themselves ill-equipped to make the transition from despotism to republicanism. Former U.S. President John Adams was not optimistic.
The people of South America are the most ignorant, the most bigoted, the most superstitious of all Roman Catholics in Christendom. No Catholics on earth were so abjectly devoted to their priests.
He concluded that any attempt to organize representative government in any Latin American nation
would be as absurd as a similar plan would be to establish democracies among the birds, beasts, and fishes.
While such views were remarkably prejudiced, he was not entirely wrong. By 1821, public education was rapidly becoming available to most U.S. children. Indeed, the United States was among the world's most literate societies. The few Mexican intellectuals emphasized the need for communal schooling, but the prevailing chaos made progress impossible. Some estimates reported illiteracy rates as high as 99%. Small wonder, then, that the ruling 1% regarded the majority as ignorant savages, more to be restrained than consulted. Even when the revolution ended, Mexicans continued to die in droves. City dwellers who were primarily mestizo, illiterate, and dismissed by the ruling elites as rabble, lived mostly in ground-level lodgings that flooded each rainy season. Such conditions promoted a glut of diseases and an appallingly high mortality rate. Fully 1/3 of all urban deaths were those of children under the age of 3. Those living in the country fared little better. There, famine was a cyclical occurrence. So too were outbreaks of smallpox and another local disease that resembled smallpox, but affected only those of Indian lineage. Like the United States, Mexico consisted of many regions. Unlike the United States, wretched roads and rugged landscapes made many of them virtually inaccessible. Consequently, most who lived outside Mexico City identified more with their region than the nation. Of all the Mexican states, Tejas was the most remote. There, the native Mexicans, Tejanos, battled against a brutal terrain, a capricious climate, and belligerent Comanche, Apache, and Kiowa tribesmen. While government officials could tempt few interior Mexicans to locate to such a God-forsaken place, a Norte Americano named Moses Austin presented what seemed to be a feasible plan.